How many cities have their own mountain park system? There are 47 parks and conservation areas comprising 14,000 acres of land in the mountains. It includes Red Rocks Amphitheater and Winter Park Ski Resort, 2 buffalo herds. What's not to love?
And it is surprising to people to hear that they own all this land.
Even though it's the Denver Mountain Parks, many of our parks are really a worldwide destination.
Denver really innovated this idea of maintaining parkland in the mountains for the use of the public outside of Denver city limits.
Winter Park gets its name because it is literally Denver's Winter Park. In fact, when it first opened, that's what it was called, was Denver's Winter Park.
These old buildings that Denver Mountain Parks has are very special in that they're blasts from the past.
Denver's mountain park system is very unique because of its size. That puts it ahead of all other park systems in the United States.
This program was generously made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with support from the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, and the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, with additional support from these fine organizations. And viewers like you, thank you.
Majestic, iconic, historical. These are just some of the words to describe the wealth of landscapes and viewsheds that make up Denver's mountain parks. Constructed between 1912 and 1941, the Denver Mountain Parks are a vast system of rural and conservation areas consisting of 47 foothill and mountain parks interconnected by scenic drives and byways, all within reach of the city of Denver.
It's fascinating how little the Denver citizens know about the Denver Mountain Park system. It's 23 square miles of land owned outside of the municipal boundaries of the city of Denver in Jefferson County, Douglas County, Clear Creek County, and Grand County.
It encompasses more than 14,000 acres of mountain land, up to 50 miles outside of Denver city limits.
If you think about the number 22 mountain parks, and then there's another 20-some designated byways and drives that you have.
When most people think about the Denver mountain parks, they think about nature and trails and getting back out into the wilderness. But a lot of those places have historic structures and buildings and prehistoric archaeological sites that have also been preserved.
I'm sure many people drive right through the middle of Genesee Park and see the bison herd off of I-70 and not realize that that is also a Denver mountain park. Lookout Mountain and Buffalo Bill's grave is a Denver mountain park. Bergen Park, Winter Park, and especially Mount Evans and Echo Lake. Of course, the most famous Denver mountain park is Red Rocks Amphitheater. That's internationally famous, although people may not be aware that it's a Denver city park.
If you think about Denver in the late 30s, it was that quintessential cow town. And without a doubt, the mountain park system was really built to sort of enhance the quality of life of people in Denver, first and foremost.
Access is absolutely essential to the survival and thriving of the parks. And so that means roads, that means concessionaires, that means picnic shelters, that means, it means bathrooms, it means comfort stations.
In the early 20th century, the city of Denver embarked on a bold plan to develop a system of parks that would forever preserve portions of Colorado's Front Range landscapes. It reflected three national movements of the 20th century: the City Beautiful movement, the National and State Park movement, and Civilian Conservation Corps movements. This is the story of how Denver's mountain parks were formed, the visionaries who made it happen, and why preserving these parks for generations to come is vital.
The Denver Mountain Park's genesis is oftentimes attributed to Mayor Robert Speer, who came back from the Columbian Exposition of 1893 with big ideas about turning Denver into Paris on the Platte.
Mayor Speer was really aware of Denver's position as the gateway to the Rocky Mountains, and he wanted to promote that as much as he could. The trick, of course, as with all of Speer's visionary ideas, is that somebody had to pay for this.
But the real prime mover of the mountain parks effort was John Brisbane Walker, an entrepreneur who came to Denver in the early days, then moved to New York, owned Cosmopolitan magazine, sold it for a cool $1 million to William Randolph Hearst, and came back and bought the Garden of the Red Rocks, which is now known as the Red Rocks Park.
Walker was a very colorful Denver entrepreneur, a man who developed early amusement parks and recreational diversions.
It was his idea that he could bring tourists to his operation by having a mountain park, and he promoted that to the city.
And so businessmen like Walker allied with Mayor Speer in order to develop a plan to create infrastructure, to create roads that would connect Denver with these remote areas in the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains.
They did follow somewhat different strategies because Speer was looking to have those properties donated.
But Walker really lobbied organizations, the Denver Chamber of Commerce, the Denver Real Estate Guild, and particularly the Denver Motorists Club, to build the political capital in order to convince Denver voters to tax themselves in order to pay for the park system.
In 1912, those folks had done their deliberating and they put forward an amendment to the charter of the city of Denver that would allow the city to tax in order to acquire spaces of beauty, of inspiration outside the city's borders.
And in the election of 1912, voters went to the polls, encouraged somewhat by beautiful women who were dressed up in gorgeous gowns with sashes saying, "Vote for Denver Mountain Parks," and overwhelmingly approved the mill levy in order to fund the mountain park system. As soon as voters voted the funds to create the Denver park system, park planners got to work.
And in 1914, hired Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. out of Brookline, Massachusetts, whose father had been the chief architect of the White City in Chicago during the Columbian Exposition.
Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., successor to his father's architectural legacy, developed large-scale plans for Denver's mountain parks and roads. Completed in 1914, Olmsted's vision would guide the city's developers for years to come and set the stage for regional open space planning in Colorado. The talents of several prominent Denver architects were enlisted to design the mountain park's buildings and structures.
The Denver Mountain Parks are filled with examples of really iconic historic architecture. Jacques Benedict, Sacco de Boer, Fisher and Fisher, many of the shelters and well houses were designed by these famous Denver and Colorado architects. The Olmsted plan for the mountain parks was somewhat audacious in that he contemplated acquisition of over 40,000 acres of land. This, over a period of time, was not achieved. They achieved 10,000 in Jefferson County and 14,000 in total. The first parks in the Denver Mountain Park system was Genesee and Lookout Mountain. Genesee had been acquired earlier by Warwick Downing and a man named Pence and some others to protect it from being completely denuded by a logging operation. In August of 1913, when they opened it, those two were the first two, along with Lariat Loop Road that had been built up Lookout Mountain to access it. The first push for acquisition of properties was from the inception to about 1927.
In the 1930s and 40s, the manager of Denver's parks and outdoor facilities was a man named George Cranmer, who really drove the park system and acquired Red Rocks Amphitheater and the Winter Park ski area, and really took the mountain park system to a whole new level, far beyond anything that even Speer and Walker had imagined in terms of recreational amenities. The Depression and then World War II really dried up the funds for this. By the 1940s and 1950s, the park system was again falling on hard times.
Many of Colorado's most beloved landscapes are within the Denver Mountain Park system. Several of these iconic parks are designated historic places and draw millions of visitors to the Mile High City each year. Denverites might be surprised to learn that Red Rocks is a Denver mountain park acquired in 1928. It is world famous and attracts over 1 million visitors each year. But the history of many lesser-known parks is noteworthy as well.
Everyone in Jefferson County has to go through a Denver Mountain Park to get from any place to any place, and yet they don't know the names. Bergen Park, Phileas Park, Lookout Mountain, all of the parks along Bear Creek, Little Park, Corwina Park, O'Fallon Park, Morrison, all of those parks are there.
The only Denver mountain park in Douglas County, Daniels Park spans 1,000 acres of land, donated in 1920 and 1937 by Florence Martin. The Florence Martin Historic Barn and Silo was the site of a 1920s working ranch and designated a Denver Landmark Historic District in 1994. The Tall Bull Memorial Site, located at the north end of the park, preserves Native American heritage.
The road that goes through Daniels Park is the old territorial road, on the southern end of which is where Kit Carson had his last campfire before he went down to Taos and passed away. Daniels Park is now part of a bunch of properties that have been preserved and kept open for the future, but it gives a great opportunity to link up with the way the West was before people got here. The shelter there was a Jock Benedict shelter built in the 1920s.
The Tall Bull Memorial area is dedicated to Indian peoples, reserved for Indian people ceremonies and rituals.
70 acres for their ceremonies, in fact. Next to the breathtaking 100-mile views, the biggest attraction at Daniels Park are the bison.
The bison that are there are worked in collaboration with the Genesee herd, which is the descendants of the last free-ranging herds from Yellowstone, acquired in about 1919. The Dedees Park is one of the fun ones because it contains the Evergreen Lake. Most people think that the Evergreen Lake is an Evergreen or a Jefferson County property, but it's really a Denver property.
Homesteaded in the late 1860s by French immigrants Julius and Marianne Dedees, the 400-acre ranch remained in the family until the city of Denver purchased it in 1919. The 65-acre Evergreen Lake was man-made, originally formed from a flood-controlled dam built in 1926. Once known as Mirror of the Mountains Parks, Evergreen Lake has drawn boating, fishing, and ice skating enthusiasts for decades.
Really what happened was that they built it so that the citizens of Denver could come up and ice skate.
Basically, since from 35 until he stopped being director of Parks and Improvement in 1947, George Cranmer set out to just basically improve the mountain park system. He developed Evergreen Park with the lake there. He was an avid outdoorsman. He wasn't much of a skier, but he loved the outdoors, in particular ice skating.
One of the things that they built in there on the south side of the lake was a warming house so that the people could come and ice skate and have a place to rent skates and drink hot cocoa and all that sort of stuff. Part of the Dedees property was the land upstream on Bear Creek, which is now the Evergreen Golf Course. One of the partners in the Denver Mountain Parks has been the State Historical Fund, which has provided money for the restoration of important architectural features in the mountain parks. The Denver Mountain Parks were so popular in the teens that it became clear they were going to need to expand the system. Part of that included the building of a road up Squaw Pass and up to what is now called Echo Lake.
The parks were designed with the recognition of automobiles as ways in which people encounter nature.
Mount Evans is a really great testament to the importance of getting automobile access to different parts of the Rocky Mountains. The road to the top of Mount Evans was the earliest and highest paved road in the nation when it was initially built. Taking a car up to the top of Mount Evans got you to the closest 14er to Denver and gave you a view of the whole front range of the Rocky Mountains.
Towering over Denver's Front Range, Mount Evans was named after John Evans, Colorado's second territorial governor. The built environment of the mountain park system is a testament to the vision and ingenuity of its designers, from the automobile roads to the buildings that blend in with nature.
That's one of the achievements of the architects of the Denver Mountain Park system, is that they were using local materials to build sympathetic architecture that felt like it was a natural extension of the parks themselves. And a really great example of that is the Crest House on the top of Mount Evans. This stone building that was used as an observatory, a place for tourists to stop. You could eat, there was a gift shop there. And the building itself was made out of stone, and it looked like it was built straight out of the peak of the mountain.
The Crest House was constructed in 1940 and 41. The architect was Edwin Francis from Denver, and the builder was Justice Rolling from Kittredge. It was his crown jewel. He called it his castle in the sky.
The Crest House was the highest business structure in the United States, 14,260 feet to be exact. Using granite quarried on site, the futuristic design was intended to evoke the heavenly realms.
It was built with the idea of the moon and the stars, so the windows for the coffee shop and the upstairs observatory part of the building represented the stars, and then the lights in the gift shop were globes, big globes, and they were the moons. It looks like it belonged there. In 1956, my grandmother, Helen Stewart, bought the Crest House, and we ran it as a souvenir shop and coffee shop.
Barbara Day's family has managed concessions at several Denver mountain parks for generations, including the Crest House. With its spectacular views and famous fried donuts, this was a popular tourist destination until tragedy struck in 1979.
1979, Labor Day weekend, when the propane fire destroyed the Crest House. So my brother was the manager up there, and he got everybody out safely, and lucky for us, no one got hurt.
Only the stone ruins of this architectural treasure remain today. After the Crest House burned down, Echo Lake Lodge at 10,600 feet became the primary stop for tourists visiting Mount Evans.
The Echo Lake Lodge was built in 1926.
The lodge was built as a place to house tourists and to enjoy that lake, which is a glacially formed lake. And it's very scenic and wonderful. There are some stone shelters there at the lake.
We work closely with the City of Denver to preserve and protect the Echo Lake Lodge. They put their share of time and money into it, as do we.
There is also another stone shelter up on Mount Evans, further up on that road, a 160-acre park called Summit Lake Park, where the mountain goats like to hang out.
Some lakes are so high they are suitable for ice skating 11 months out of the year. Summit Lake, shown here, is more than 2.5 miles above the sea.
Winter Park was the last of the Denver mountain parks to be added to the system. It also has a rich legacy of being one of the oldest continuously running ski resorts in Colorado and the 4th largest ski area in the state.
Because of our proximity to the Front Range, we've always kind of been Denver's ski area, and that history of being owned by the city of Denver, generations have grown up skiing Winter Park. The ski industry that we know it today was really started by George Cranmer in the late 30s.
Cranmer was visionary enough to actually realize that what Denver really needed was a ski area, and in 1939 he began the process of purchasing what became Winter Park. It was the last piece of the Denver Mountain Park puzzle.
George Cranmer was a really interesting guy. He was from Colorado, but he was educated in Princeton, and then came back and had an investment brokerage firm in Denver, and retired as a very, very wealthy man in his early 50s, working with a group of wealthy businessmen who were passionate about skiing in Denver, a group called the Arlberg Club. Cranmer was able to somehow procure $14,700 from this private club so he can build this park.
And he goes and he gets grant money from the federal government, and he gets the CCC and the WPA to help work on trails and installation of equipment. And that is the beginning of Winter Park.
In 1939, they started building tows. Right actually behind us is where the first rope tow at Winter Park was built. And that was with all that money that Cranmer was able to procure.
A lot of the reason for Winter Park being located where it is because of the ski train.
The ski train runs every Saturday and Sunday. It only takes a couple of hours each way, so you can get in an entire day skiing and be back in Denver in time for dinner.
And back then, in the 30s and 40s and even the 50s, it was so important to have that train connection to Denver. The original buildings of Winter Park, they were left over from West Portal, the construction of the tunnel, are all gone today. The historic structure that does exist at Winter Park is the balcony house.
And it was built in 1955, predates the first ski lift at Winter Park, and remains pretty much unchanged today.
Winter Park is a place that has given the ski industry many innovations over the years. Slope grooming was actually invented at Winter Park.
A pilot would basically tow this gigantic rotary device behind him. And what that would do is that would smooth out the run and basically groom it.
Another historic innovation of this Denver Mountain Park is the establishment of the National Sports Center for the Disabled, headquartered at Winter Park since 1970.
Part of what makes Winter Park special is that from day one in 1940 to today, there's always been an emphasis on preserving the land. The slopes at the base area are just as they were in 1940. The buildings here date back decades, and that's important because you want to preserve that heritage, and that's really, really important to everybody here at Winter Park.
While there are 22 developed Denver Mountain Parks in the system, there are also 24 conservation areas that were part of Olmsted's master plan, lands set aside to preserve and safeguard the scenic quality of Colorado's landscapes. They are mountain ridges, rocky outcrops, and animal habitats, and include parts of Mount Falcon, Bergen Park, and Deer Creek, to name a few.
As we continue to grow and population continues to swell here in Denver, having these natural places that people can come and enjoy what Colorado is all about is really, really important.
The truth is that Denver mountain parks are very often loved to death. Millions of people visit Denver's mountain parks each year. And Denver city planners are faced with the same dilemma that Mayor Sphere faced 110 years ago, which was, how do you pay for this? How do you maintain this structure? Denver's going to keep growing until we figure out what our natural limits are. And that means there's going to be more and more strain on Denver's mountain parks. And that makes preserving them all the more important, because this is really the snapshot of what life was like in Colorado in the 1920s or the 1880s in some cases. And that's the paradox of preservation in a mountain landscape, is how do you preserve the very thing that people flock to see?
In the 1950s, the mountain parks were funded from the general fund in direct competition with the urban park system.
And so when funding declined for the mountain park system in the 1950s, some of it was ultimately restored by a private organization called the Denver Mountain Parks Foundation.
With a history of funding challenges and Denver's population on the rise, the need to maintain and preserve the Denver Mountain Parks is more critical than ever.
The Denver Mountain Park's future for the city is one of restoration, but also of programming, not only of recreation, but of education.
Part of the great driving force for the people who support the Denver Mountain Parks is that they are places to learn. They are places to see a world beyond yourself.
Although no longer operated by the city of Denver, modern-day Winter Park is still Denver's Winter Park.
Of all of our visitations, 60% comes from the Front Range. The other 40% comes from other places throughout the country and the world. Even today, we're still owned by the city and county of Denver. We're operated by another company, but we're still owned by Denver, always have been, always will be. In 2002, the city basically entered into an operating agreement with a company called IntraWest. And per that agreement, IntraWest every year gives $2 million back to the city of Denver, plus 3% of all profit in excess of $33 million. And what Denver does then from there is they reapply that money into some of their city parks.
The Denver Mountain Park System is this really great sort of cross-section of cultural landscapes, because human activity has taken place in the Denver Mountain Parks for thousands of years.
They are protected by the city charter and cannot be sold in part or in total without a vote of the people.
The Denver Mountain Parks are loved and beloved, and you can't really imagine Denver without them. But on the other hand, it requires vigilance and creativity in order to preserve these gems for future generations. We're the stewards of that vision, of making sure that we have the right balance between our urban lives and the open spaces and the access to nature that makes living in Colorado so unique.